On today's episode of Locked on Wild, reinforcements are on the way.
Hey, this is Matt Boldy, and you're listening to Locked on Wild.
You're Locked on Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's happening, everybody? Welcome into another episode of Locked on Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network, we are your team each and every day, and we thank you for making Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day as well. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. Today's episode of Locked on Wild is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. On today's episode of Locked on Wild, we discuss some much-needed reinforcements for the Minnesota Wild. We'll tell you who is making the trip out to Nashville and beyond. A big call-up that many of you have been waiting for is finally on the way as well. And we'll take a look at the pesky Predators ahead of tomorrow night's game against Nashville. My name is Seth Toupal, host of Locked on Wild, and we finally have some good news on the injury front. I was about ready to rename the show Locked on Injury Updates because it just seemed like every show, this player's still out, this player's still out, this player's still out. We finally have some good news on the injury front, and it involves two of the five pieces. Two of the five. Jakub, Lauko, and Brock Faber officially back for the Minnesota Wild, and they will travel with the team to Nashville, and I would imagine they're going to play because of the other injury situations. The Wild are, how do you say, up against it in the cap. So I would imagine we'll see both of them in net or in the lineup. And that doesn't mean that the others aren't getting close as well. I do want to talk about the Kirill Kaprizov move, because obviously that raised a lot of alarm bells by moving Kirill to long-term injured reserve off of standard injured reserve. I'm not. I guess I'm not like hitting full out panic with this yet. Basically, the reason this was done is because of the injury to Marcus Johansson, because of the current cap situation, and the fact that Kirill has already missed enough games to qualify. This is purely a procedural move. By all accounts, Kirill is still progressing just fine. He was a full participant in practice earlier today, as was Jared Spurgeon. And I don't think the standard route to go down when a player gets transferred from regular to long-term injured reserve is kind of, oh no, it's gotten worse. I don't think that's the case here. I think the case here is purely a procedural move that was retroactive to his initial initial injury date, which just allows the Wild a little more flexibility to be able to simply navigate these other stretches. Marcus Johansson immediately put on injured reserve, and it was confirmed that he has a concussion. You can't get a concussion from flopping. You just can't. I'm sorry. But an interesting, we had speculated about a similar sort of thing with Brock Faber. And it was interesting to learn today that if you have a concussion, you have to be out of the lineup for at least 7 days. Non-negotiable. So there is a concussion protocol in place for the National Hockey League. Theirs is basically just a week for sure. So Johansson goes right on injured reserve because he's got to miss at least a week. And after that, they'll evaluate and discuss. But Michael Russo tweeting, or actually Puckpedia tweeting out earlier today, after the Minnesota Wild activated Jakub Lauko and exited long-term injured reserve, they called up Liam Ohgren, leaving them with $21K in cap space. They put Kirill Kaprizov on long-term injured reserve, then called up Devon Shore and Brendan Gaunce. By having Öhgren on their roster prior to re-entering long-term injured reserve, just his $887K cap hit counts against the cap, not his $1.3 million AAV, which includes performance bonuses. The Wild now have $7.45 million in cap space remaining in long-term injured reserve. I don't know who the capologist is for the Minnesota Wild, but I can tell you for sure, Matt Sells. Matt Sells needs a raise because this goes well beyond simple cap maneuvering. This is cap life support that the Minnesota Wild have been on with all of these injuries. And the fact that they have been able to maneuver this without getting, imagine if something had fallen through the cracks and the Wild got bit. They nearly got bit the other night because of of Marc-Andre Fleury being sick. But imagine if there was something that popped up to where the Wilds legitimately had to field a lesser team because they couldn't afford to have players on the roster. Matt Sells has made sure that has not happened. So big props to Matt Sells for just keeping this going through just a slog of injuries. We will we'll talk about the recalls and the returns and what the Wild are obviously going to be missing with a guy like Kirill Kaprizov still not out there, but what they gain in return for Jakub Lauko and Brock Faber coming back. But no timetable yet on Jonas Brodin is the latest update. But the fact that Spurgeon was a full participant at practice, the fact that Kirill Kaprizov was a full participant at practice, I would say that they are getting very, very close to finally returning to the lineup, which is a very good thing for this Minnesota Wild team. So, and also, just talking to Brock Faber, Michael Russo tweeting out, Faber doesn't blame Jake Neighbors at all. Says he's been hit like that 1,000 times, and he's more upset for catching a puck and exposing his head and neck area. But looks as though he is ready to rock. Good thing, because the Wilds can certainly use him going forward, because it does reunite what has been a dynamite D pairing for this Minnesota Wild team. So we've got a lot to discuss in the rest of today's show, but just wanted to update everybody on all the procedural things that have been going on with this team here lately. We are 2 out of the 5 back, so just 3 remain for this Minnesota Wild team to be at full strength, and that day cannot come soon enough. But let's talk about what we're getting, having a few of these guys back in the lineup. We'll discuss that as we continue today's episode of Locked on Wild after this. Today's episode of Locked on Wild is brought to you by Indeed. You just realized your business needed to hire somebody yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Well, it's easy. Just use Indeed. When it comes to hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed's sponsored jobs put your post right at the top of the page and help you reach the right candidates faster. Obviously, went through the job hunt myself for 5 months a few months ago, and it's not an easy process. So if you are a job seeker, Indeed is the best way to find your perfect fit for a job so that you can get back to being your happy self. Now, you can speed up your hiring process with a $75 sponsored job credit. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need. Welcome back to today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Appreciate everybody tuning in throughout the week as you do. Procedural programming note for you. No postcast tomorrow for the Nashville game. We will have another episode coming out before then. But then we will have a live show for you as typical coming up on Sunday at noon. So we'll talk about what we see in the Nashville game. We'll get you geared up for the game Monday against Colorado. We'll have a postcast for the Monday game, but no postcast for tomorrow's game against the Predators. So let's talk about what we get in return for getting a guy like Brock Faber back into the lineup. Well, the answer is a lot. The numbers, courtesy of Money Puck, for D pairings that have played a minimum of 200 minutes on the ice together, Jake Middleton and Brock Faber are third in the league at 1.15 goals against per 60 minutes. Just 8 5-on-5 goals against in 417.4 minutes. And 23 goals for in that same span. So not only are Middleton and Faber stopping opponents from scoring, they're also chipping into the offense as well. So you put Brock Faber back out there, you're getting one of the better D pairings in the league reunited in Jake Middleton and Brock Faber. And these last few games, Middleton has been very critical of his performance. I think it's pretty easy to see that the D just has been lacking since losing their top 3 defensemen. And if that is a surprise to anybody, I'm sorry, but it's just how it goes. You lose top performers and the performance struggles. The Wilds over the last 8 games, or the last 7 games, are 4-3. They're averaging giving up 3.29 goals per game in that span, and also allowing 31.7 shots per game. Now, where were these numbers at the beginning of the season? Well, if you go to the first, I just used to the end of November as kind of the barometer for this team. The Minnesota Wilds were 16-4-4. They're allowing 2.33 goals against per game. And they're giving up 28.8 shots per game. So you look at the difference there in those first 24 games of the season compared to this most recent 7. And yeah, there's some overlap in between. You're talking about almost a goal per game more. In fact, over a goal per game more. And you're also giving up almost 4 shots per game more each night. So your defense, without your top contributors, is giving up more shots and is not doing as good of a job to keep things clean for Filip Gustavsson or Marc-Andre Fleury. Again, to be expected with not having these guys in the lineup. So getting Brock Faber back should help get those defensive metrics back to at least on track for where they were at the beginning of the season. And I know it's been a rough go for Filip Gustavsson here over the last 4 games with 19 goals allowed. We said it in the postcast after the Avalanche game, or after the Edmonton game. You had 5 third-pairing defensemen in the lineup at once. Many of them playing number 2, number 3, or number 4 in that lineup. It's just a tall order to try to get that same level of defensive performance. So Faber coming back is going to help on offense, defense, and special teams for this Minnesota Wild team. That is a huge boost, a big boost for this team. And it's finally some good news on the injury front. But let's not overlook the return of Jakub Lauko to the fourth line. Now, Lauko's not and never has been a huge point producer. But if you look at what has gone on with Marat Husnadinov's numbers pretty much all season, I think a thing that has been missing on the Husnadinov line, especially since Lauko exited, is similar speed. Similar speed to what Husnadinov brings to the table himself. Lauko brings that. He brings that level of quickness to the game. And so it's not going to be Husnadinov having to try to, slow his pace down to keep at a similar level with his line mates. He now has Lauko that those two can fly around the ice and can try to do some of the things that they were doing early in the season when we thought that combination looked pretty good. The speed has been sorely lacking from that bottom portion of the lineup. And so Lauko bringing some physicality to the mix, bringing a little bit of PK ability as well. That's a big boost to the lineup for the Minnesota Wild as well. Faber's obviously the bigger boost, but Lauko is an NHL guy, and the Wild have they've been going with AHLers on that fourth line for a while, and it's starting to show. So getting somebody that is an NHL caliber player back on that line is another big piece and a big boost for this Minnesota Wild team. But let's talk about the biggest one, the one that everybody wanted to see, the move that has been anticipated for weeks. Mr. Liam Ohgren getting the call up and practicing on line 2 today with Joel Eriksson and with Ryan Hartman. Interesting combination for line 2, but you don't have Marcus Johansson. Kirill Kaprizov is still out of the lineup, so Matt Boldy is going to play on that top line with Matt Zuccarello and Marco Rossi. That's non-negotiable at this point. And looking at Liam Ohgren's recent performances, he had a 3-point night, 2 goals and an assist on the 15th. He had an assist on the 12th. He had 3 assists on the 10th. So in his last 3 games, he has 2 goals and 5 assists. But what I like more is in that same span, in those 3 games, he's got 10 shots on goal. He has, for the season, 74 shots on goal in 25 games played. So he's averaging right about 3 shots per game. And you know what wasn't being averaged 3 shots per game in that same spot? Well, that second line wing spot is averaging more like 1.5. Now, I think know what Marcus Johansson brings to that combination. It's very clearly the speed. It's very clearly the speed is the element that he contributes to that line with Boldy and with Eriksson. That's why he's there, because Joel Eriksson's not the fleetest of foot. Ryan Hartman's not the fleetest of foot. Matt Boldy's not the fleetest of foot. He brings the speed, but it just would be nice to be able to bring both. To bring the shot with the speed. I said it a few weeks ago, and I think I'm going to double down on it. If you took Ryan Hartman and you took Marcus Johansson and you combined them together, your second line problems are long gone. There is, in the midst of the two of them, a complete NHL player somewhere in that midst. And what that line combination is going to need to do with Liam Ohgren, with Ryan Hartman, with Joel Eriksson as a combination is a little bit of an intermediate game. So you've got Joel Eriksson, one of the better net front players on this team. I think, though, second now to Marco Rossi. Hard to say. He might be 1B or 1A Rossi is really, really good at it too. But no question that those are the two best net front players on the team. So you want to maximize that for Joel Eriksson, the ability to deflect shots, to pick up rebounds. And so what I think the Wild should look to do with that combination on the ice is face-off circles and in. Have Liam Ohgren and Ryan Hartman just kind of creep in. You obviously can have whichever defenseman run things from up top. Almost treat it like a power play where you try to get the shots from the face-off circles and let Joel Eriksson clean up the rebounds if the initial shots aren't enough. Öhgren certainly has the power forward type style to his game. It's going to be really interesting to see what is different about him since we last saw. Is it simply a more aggressiveness? Is he simply more aggressive with the puck? Is that the change? Does he have little subtle elements that he's added to his game? Because it was very clear that the Minnesota Wild wanted him to work on some things for an extended period of time while he was down in Iowa. And now 12 goals in 25 games, 23 points in 25 games. There's a lot to like with what Liam has been doing here lately. And maybe he does follow the Rossi path in its entirety to where now he just sticks. Now that he's up, he just sticks and he never gets sent back down. But that's a big thing to look for in the game against the Predators is what looks different about Liam Ohgren's game. Now that he's had some time down in Iowa and has had some success down there. That'll be the big thing that I'll be watching in tomorrow's game. But it's going to be a line combination that's not going to have a ton of speed, but I think there are ways to assist with that. I would just like to see them try to camp, hunker down, and really keep possessions alive by just winning battles along the boards and just getting a shot out to that face-off circle area and in. Really maximize those medium and high danger shot attempts when that combination is on the ice. We'll see what happens. Because the Nashville Predators, I guess, are starting to kind of get things figured out. So we'll take a look at how the Preds have done over their last 8 games. I'll give you a hint. Pretty similar to how the Minnesota Wild have done. We'll take a look at Nashville by the numbers as we continue today's episode of Locked on Wild after this. Today's episode of Locked on Wild is brought to you by Game Time. Folks, I love going to live events, whether it's sports, music, theater, or even a comedy show. One of my favorite all time was seeing Kenny Chesney in concert at US Bank Stadium a few summers ago. It was a great experience. The seats were fantastic. And, not only that, but I've also seen Garth Brooks at US Bank Stadium on floor level, by the way. Just another unforgettable experience. And tickets were the last thing that I had to worry about because the experience was incredibly easy. Game Time has a new feature that makes it even easier to get tickets to your favorite events with their new feature, Game Time Picks. This feature filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. Final segment of today's episode of Locked on Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day. Reminder, no postcast tomorrow, but we do have a live show coming up for you again on Sunday at noon. Denny will be talking over the recent performance for the Minnesota Wild, as well as continued coverage of the push to the trade deadline. And we'll talk about Marco Rossi and Matt Boldy as well. So a lot to get to on Sunday. Make sure to join us at noon right here on YouTube. All right, let's talk about the Nashville Predators, who have the exact same amount of points as the Minnesota Wild do in their last 6 games. Now, the Predators have played 6 since January 1st. The Minnesota Wild have played 7. Both teams have 4 wins. The Wild are 4-3. The Predators are 4-2. By the numbers, the Wild 21 goals scored, 23 allowed. So that's 3 goals per game. The Predators are at 17 goals for, 15 goals against. 2.83 goals for per game, 2.5 goals against per game. The Wild are at 3.29 goals against per game. Pretty identical on the power play. Predators have the edge, 26.3% since January 1st. The Minnesota Wild are at 23.1%, 75% on the penalty kill for the Preds, 73.7% for the Minnesota Wild. The big thing here, the Predators are in the positive territory in the shots department, and they are just under 52% in the faceoff circle since January 1st. The Wild are 26 shots for, 32 shots against, and 46.3% in the dot. We know, though, the faceoff circle is not a indictment of team performance. If any team has found the way to offset faceoff losses, it's the Minnesota Wild. I want to go back even further. Let's go to December 1st, at the time in which the injuries started to mount for the Minnesota Wild. The Wild are 18th in the league in points. They are 11-10 now in their last 21 games. So they got 22 points in the 21 games. The Nashville Predators still 29th in the league. So since December 1st, the Predators are 8-10-1 on the season. They're still struggling to score goals. They still can't score goals to save their lives. Now, it's been better recently, but it's still not great by the Predators. And some of the key pieces on this Predators team are potentially starting to come out of their funk a little bit. Filip Forsberg and Steven Stamkos both have 4 goals in their last 6 games, as does Ryan O'Reilly. Beyond that, so if you can limit those 3, you're going to have a pretty good time, because the only other goals that have been scored in that 6-game span, not by Forsberg, Stamkos, or O'Reilly, Roman Josi, Gustav Nyquist, Colton Sissons, Fedor Shvetsov, and Justin Barron. By my math, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 non-Forsberg, Stamkos O'Reilly goals over that 6-game span. Sounds familiar. Now, how are the Minnesota Wild doing in that same span? Zuccarello has 3 goals in the last 7 games. Boldy has 4. Rossi has 3. Hartman has 3. Eriksson has 2. Bogosian has 2. Johansson with 1. Middleton with 1. Trennan with 1. Merrill with 1. A little more spread out. A little more evenly spread. A little bit more of a pulse in the secondary scoring department, which is exactly what we've been hoping for here forever, is finally now starting to really kind of get rolling. And Ryan Hartman especially, like big props to Ryan Hartman for finding his scoring groove again over these last few games. He had a just hellacious drought. I think it was right around 20 games of no points, no goals. And he's finally starting to get out of that and to get back towards what we know him to be. Marco Rossi continues his impressive performance this year. Boldy's getting back on track. Zuccarello continues to be like a huge resurgence this year. And the unfortunate part for Zuccarello is that he's going to end up missing a chunk of the season for an injury that he could not have done anything to prevent. Not an injury that he had any say over whatsoever. Friendly fire. But other than that, he has been great. He's been great all season. And this is what this team is going to need, not only now, but the rest of the season too. Like, this can't stop once Kirill Kaprizov comes back. You can't just say, well, Kirill's back now. We don't have to worry about scoring any goals because he's going to do it all. Like, this pressure and push from a scoring perspective needs to continue. If this team is going to be able to get back to where they were early on in the season. Now, let's look at the goalies for both teams. I'm going to go since December 1st because, again, that's kind of the benchmark that I use as to when the injuries started to mount for the Minnesota Wild. Since December 1st, Filip Gustafsson is 7-5. He's got a 3.37 goals against average and an .895 save percentage. Marc-Andre Fleury in that same span, he's 4-3, but a 2.45 goals against average and a .914 save percentage. That's why he's getting the start against the Preds tomorrow night. For the Predators, their numbers look like this. UC Saros, since December 1st, is 4-8-1 with a 2.95 goals against average and an .891 save percentage. Justus Annunen, 4-2 with a 2.39 and a .923 save percentage. Safe to say that the primary goalies might be hitting a little bit of a wall here between both of these teams. Both of these goalies have banked a fair amount of starts so far this season. Saros has played in 34 games of the however many his team has played. And Filip Gustafsson on the same wavelength. He's been in 31 games so far this year. I think these two are just hitting a little bit of a maybe overuse at this point in the season. Now, Saros did win his most recent start against Chicago, 2 goals allowed on 26 shots. But before that, he gave up 3 against Washington, faced just 15 shots in that game, gave up 4 to Winnipeg on 29 shots. He lost to Winnipeg twice, actually, in the last 5 games, and shut out Vancouver back on January 3rd. So I don't know who is going to be starting for Nashville. We'll try to get that to you if we can before the game, but I would imagine it might just be night of the backups for both teams to see if the backups can go on a little bit of a run here to try to help propel these teams to where they both want to go. Should be it's going to be a tight game between the Preds and the Wild. It would not surprise me at all if it's a 1-goal game. Key for the Wild is just to try to iron out some of the defensive lapses that have been very prevalent over these last 6 to 8 games. If they can iron out some of that, they're going to be just fine, and it'll be an opportunity to pick up a big win and to push those pesky Preds further down the Central Division standings. So that will do it for today's episode. Appreciate everybody tuning in as always, and we thank you for making Locked On Wild part of your regular listening routine here throughout your week. Make sure to hit the like button if you have not already, so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. We have new episodes for you every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.